Remember that game with Carl and his 14-year-old daughter? Yeah, this is the story about that. So what happens when you are Bruce's target? Let me describe the situation. So the game started a couple of years ago, during the Christmas holidays. I had been playing RPGs for a few years, mostly with my school friends in pretty silly casual games, while my older brother Bobby was involved in a much more serious, large group of people from his university. I'd been itching to join one of Bobby's games for a while, but up until then, he'd been reluctant to bring me along as I was pretty young, and the games he played tended to get into some pretty mature stuff. As it turned out, he absolutely made the right call. In any case, when I was 15 and during the holidays, he mentioned his friend Bruce was starting up a Runes Lord game, and I asked to join. Bruce gave the okay, and I set to work on making a half-orc magus. Now fast forward a little, and we're into the game itself. Bruce has thus far been charming, mellow, and likable, and eagerly engaging with my very enthusiastic style of role-playing. See, I really like to jump into the mind of my characters and get super in character. I do a voice/accent. I adopt some of their mannerisms, and I make sure to act exclusively how the character would act in a situation, completely removed from my own personality where possible. However, that style of role-playing apparently isn't good enough for Bruce. To elaborate, he was insistent on two things. 1. When you speak out of character, you do a moose horn. You hold your thumb to your head and hold your fingers out. Any and all things you say without the moose horn, he considers to be spoken in character. The second thing he insisted on was role-playing every single tedious detail possible. You have to roleplay every single conversation with every NPC, no matter how insignificant, in excruciating detail. You can't just open a door. You have to describe twisting the handle and if you push or pull. Worst off, for spellcasters, he insisted that they were not allowed to learn new spells unless they explicitly roleplayed the acquisition of those spells. That's right, sorcerers, bards, oracles, and everybody else who just knows their spells instinctively, they still have to roleplay it. Clerics, druids, and everyone else who just knows all their spells automatically by praying/communing with nature for the ones that they need every morning? Yeah, they've got to roleplay how they're learning these new spells, or they don't get any. He also loved to fixate on one or two minor aspects of a character and basically force me to play them up by how the NPCs constantly treated me. See, with my magus, I portrayed him as being an arrogant guy who was kind of rude to people and generally had an inflated sense of his own importance. Not a particularly likable person, sure, but it wasn't the sole aspect of my character. He was meant to also be a shrewd, sharp-witted kind of guy who was charming once you got past the prickly exterior, and while part of the fault lies with me not doing a good enough job at role-playing that, Bruce had virtually every NPC we met take an instant dislike to him, even when he hadn't really done anything wrong. When I offered to pay for information that we needed at a local bar, the barkeep just robs me, and everyone in the bar laughs. I make a joke with a nobleman who is offering to take us hunting about the quality of his steeds. He instantly says, "Forget you, you can't hunt with me." At one point, I complained to Bruce after a session about how every NPC we met seems to despise me, and he just told me, "I'm just portraying a reasonable response to your character's personality." I begrudgingly accepted because, yeah, I was playing him to be kind of a jerk. so I just moved on and tried to play the game. In all of that character's lifespan, there was one NPC who actually liked him. See, in Rise of the Rune Lords, there's this scripted encounter where this redhead girl approaches whichever male has the highest charisma in the party, leads him to her house, and attempts to seduce him. I happen to be rocking a charisma of somewhere in the realms of 14 to 16, while no other male in the party came close, so I was the target. So I'm led to her house. Clothes come off. My character is having a fun time. Then, her father comes in and knocks me out with one punch before dragging me up to the roof of the house, dangling my unconscious and naked body over the edge of the roof, waving a knife around and threatening to kill me in front of the entire town. All the while, Bruce describes the situation. Below you, there are a bunch of women in the crowd, staring in awe at your chiseled oiled abs and your magnum orcish member, while the bartender, the sheriff, and a whole bunch of other townsfolk you have met laugh at you while trying to talk the father down from ending your life. Fortunately, a couple of members of the party turned up and rescued me, so I made it out alive while the father was arrested. Meanwhile, I started up kind of a relationship with the daughter, who took over her father's shop. It was a cool thing to be doing in character. She's the one person in town who likes him, he doesn't have to pay for room and board, and he can help her out with the business, since I'd written into his backstory that he had a merchant background. Except, of course, Bruce being Bruce was so strict about the details and stuff that one time, I kid you not, he told me, because you were up all night enjoying your new girlfriend, you have to spend the day with the fatigue condition. I had no say in this, and when I tried to object, he just said, "Hey, I've done it all night before, and it really leaves you wrecked." Cool, dude. That's not the point, but cool. Fast forward a bit, and we're in a dungeon. We enter a room, and he describes the place. Basically, there's a fountain or something at the other end. He makes absolutely no indication that there's either any danger in the room or that there's anybody trying to stop us as we do anything. He portrayed it as just another room, and so, like with the other rooms, I entered and went to check out the fountain. I'm then immediately ambushed by these monsters with super long clawed arms, while the rest of the party is still at the entrance and powerless to do anything. They rip me to pieces, and the party runs in, fighting them plus a closet. They actually lose the fight. One of the other players, Carl, as well as his 14-year-old daughter, are both killed by the closet, while the other players, Bobby and Xavier, are forced to flee, taking Carl's body with them. He was a gnome, so it was easy. After this fight, Bruce berated me for just rushing in. If you just waited a second, the closet was going to come down and start monologuing to you guys. Except, there was no way for me to realize this. He just described the room to us and then said absolutely nothing as we entered. No monologuing fiend. Oh, and you know what? It gets worse. / better. Because admittedly, the scene that played out was pretty funny, if kinda stupid. See, Carl was an arcanist, and through archetypes and stuff, he had a clockwork duck as his familiar. When he died, the duck went inert and was just left behind in the room as Bobby and Xavier ran away with Carl's body. So they get back to town, and the priest raised Carl from the dead. Carl's familiar then wakes up alone in the room and is attacked by the closet. The clockwork duck solos the closet. Carl's daughter and I make new characters who join the party, and we all return to the dungeon to find the duck tearing chunks out of the dead closet with its feet. This scene was both hilarious and completely enraging. Moving on, as mentioned, I made a new character. At this stage, I was sick of everybody we met hating me for no good reason, and so I figured that the reason it's happening is because I'm just playing a jerk. Okay, fine. In that case, I'll do a complete 180. My new character was a lawful good human cavalier, worshipper of Iomade, and just your typical knight in shining armor. I absolutely roleplayed him that way. Every single time we met new people, I was always polite, friendly, and kind. I made sure to make my new character likable. And yet every single person we met still took an immediate dislike to me. But more on that later. Another really annoying thing that Bruce did was that he massively played up the religious aspects of every character. In Bruce's mind, our gods were watching us at all times, and if we ever put a toe out of line, they would abandon us. In my case, it was completely irrelevant, because I'm a cavalier, not a paladin, but with the others, it kind of mattered, especially with Xavier. Xavier was playing an oracle, and even though oracles are explicitly stated to getting their powers through mysterious, otherworldly means, Bruce treated them like they were clerics, drawing power from their deity. So if Xavier ever stepped out of line and did something that betrayed the tenets of his deity, he would lose all his powers, as if he was a paladin who just set fire to an orphanage. Fortunately, Xavier never had to deal with that, partly because he made sure not to step out of line, but partly because Bruce really didn't care about his deity. Nah, Bruce didn't care about most deities. The only deity he really cared about was Iomade. Oops. See, Bruce had at one point in another game played an Iomadean, or something. So he knew all about her and had the biggest obsession with making sure that the fact that my character worshipped her came up every single session. One time, I accidentally let it slip to the sheriff that a man we just brought to town had worked with the goblins, and so the sheriff instantly arrested him on the spot. When the other party members tried to intervene, he just said, "There's no way I'm taking your word over the word of an Iomadean knight." Every time we went to the temple of Serenray, the priest there would lecture me on how I wasn't being a devout enough follower. Yeah, the priest of Serenray was lecturing me on how to worship Iomade. When we got to Magnamar, I asked the guard for directions to the temple of Iomade, and the guard spent the next 15 minutes mocking me and my goddess before arresting me for getting sick of it and drawing my sword. And rather than throwing me into jail for pulling a sword on him, as would be reasonable in that situation, he dragged me to the temple of Iomade, you know, where I was already trying to go, and gave me to the head priestess so she could berate me for being a bad follower, after I just gotten arrested for defending Iomade's honor. The most egregious example of this obsession with Iomade, as well as his insistence that the gods cared about what each and every one of their followers is doing every second of every hour of every day, came when we were searching a dungeon. Bobby had just gone into a room on his own, and Bruce told him how the room was filled with treasure. Now, mind you, at that moment, Bobby was the only guy in the room, the only guy who knew there was treasure. I will also remind you that whenever I spoke in character, I would put on a special voice and accent to distinguish my character's words from my own. Also, Bobby is my brother, and I banter with him a lot. So in this moment, I joked that he should give me all of the treasure, or else. But I didn't do the moose horn, and Bruce lost it. He just sighed, slammed his hands on the table, and told me, "For your greed, Iomade is abandoning you." My first thought was, So what? I'm a cavalier, not a paladin. But then I calmly explained that I was not speaking in character and that I do a voice when I am. He grumbled, retracting his statement, and then complained, "Next time, use the moose horn." But guys, do remember, I was playing a cavalier, not a paladin. And everywhere I went, he was treating me like a paladin. This character's religion was never meant to be a major aspect of his character, and it certainly wasn't something I ever spent too much time focusing on or playing up when I roleplayed, barring when I went to temples. This character was just meant to be an ordinary guy, wandering the land trying to do the right thing. And that is how I roleplayed him. Yet everywhere I went, everyone was either obsessing over my worship of Iamade, hating me for no discernible reason, or both. And frankly, it was usually both. Oh, and also, Bruce loved to humiliate me in the game. You might have already gotten a sense of that from the whole rooftop dangling scene from earlier, but it got way worse with my second character. In the very first session with this character, he killed my mount off screen, without me getting any input into it, for the sole reason that I tied it to a tree before entering a forest that was too thick to bring it into. He then also told me, when you get a new mount, its stats do not matter. It will automatically die in one hit in any combat. Every time we went into a new area or a new fight, I was always the guy who got isolated, who was targeted by enemies, and who ended up in the most compromising situations. One time, I got dominated in this lumber mill, and the guy who did it ordered me to jump over a safety barrier into a saw or something. But apparently to climb over something like a 4-foot safety barrier, you need to make a climb check, which I got an armor check penalty for. So I spent the entire combat failing to climb over a safety barrier while attempting to off myself, as the party kicked butt. Another time, we were exploring a haunted mansion and I was attacked by a cursed Garf. Okay, that's fine, except he didn't let me roll my own saving throws or keep track of my own HP. And then at the end he says, "You enter the afterlife for a brief moment, but then a snail monster brings you back." He then showed me that he rolled a natural 20 on my last saving throw. But the moment that really takes the cake for humiliation and targeting me was when he attempted to off my character on the toilet. We were sitting down having dinner with people who we thought were dead, only to come to their estate in Magnamar and find them alive and well. For some reason, we were too dumb to figure out what was up and had dinner with them, and I got super drunk. Then Bruce tells me how, for a moment, it appears like monsters are sitting around the table, only for them to disappear. I have no idea what's going on, so in character, I excuse myself to go to the bathroom so I can take a moment and think about what I just saw. As my character is peeing, Bruce tells me, "You see a faceless stalker in the mirror, climbing in through the window. You've left your weapons and shield at the door. Also, since you're peeing and wearing plate armor, you have taken off your entire lower half of your armor." Because apparently a codpiece is not a separate armor piece. In any case, I was unarmed, only allowed half my armor bonus, and isolated with a faceless stalker, while drunk and peeing. As the monster started grappling me, it drains my blood and starts transforming into me. Bruce gleefully describes, "While this is happening, you keep peeing because you can't control when you stop peeing. What do?" In that moment, I was genuinely stumped. I had no idea what to do, and so I asked the other players for help, but before anybody could answer, Bruce said, "No one else can talk. He needs to get out of this one himself." I couldn't figure out what to do, This was such a messed up, random situation, and I was both incredibly frustrated and completely desperate. So Carl writes the word yell on his palm and shows me under the table. But Bruce saw it, and Bruce got very angry. "Carl, how dare you help him out? That is completely unfair, and you just denied me a death." After he was done, I told Bruce I yelled for help, and Bruce made the rest of the party roll perception, because a blood-curdling scream for help from the next room over requires a perception check to hear, one with a high enough DC that only one person heard it. Fortunately, that was enough, and I ended up surviving the encounter. But at the end of it, as everybody came to the bathroom to check on me, Bruce was happy to say, "You see him lying half exposed on the floor, in a pool of his own pee and blood." Luckily, the game didn't last much longer after that. I missed a couple of sessions because I'd been busy with school, and I come back to one session as the party is looking for something. I can't remember what it was, and honestly, I don't even know if I ever really found out. But they were searching Magnamar, and were just coming up with nothing. Now, before the session started, I took Bruce aside and told him I wanted to stop playing as my current character because I wasn't having any fun with him. So I asked if there was any way we could wrap things up for him this session in a satisfying manner. Bruce agreed, and we got to the session. So midway through, we are just completely stuck. We have no leads, no divination magic, no money to hire someone else to do the divination for us, and the story just can't progress. We sit for quite a while debating what to do, before Bruce just gives an exasperated sigh. He says, "How are you guys stuck on this? The solution is right in front of you." None of us know what he's talking about, so he begrudgingly elaborates, pointing at me. "You were telling me earlier how you wanted to stop playing Highwell. Well, just go to the Temple of Iamade and pledge your services to them in exchange for some divine intervention." Right, because that was the obvious solution to our problem. How could I have been so oblivious? Anyway, I was just bored and tired and wanting to go home at this point, so I went along with it. Never mind that this character would not pledge himself to serve a church in exchange for some divination, because he's not that devout, and he's already got a job to do. But I went with it, and the priest gave us the information we needed, and then told me that my debt for the magic was that I had to go on a crusade to the World Wound. Yeah, that's his idea of a satisfying end. The guy who isn't that devout goes on a crusade to the Pathfinder equivalent to the Eye of Terror in exchange for plot details. So we went to the place, beat up a Lamia, and then wrapped up the session with my character going off to certain death. And then, after that session, Bruce told everyone that he wanted to put the game on hiatus for a while, and I haven't seen or heard from him since. It's quite crazy to see so many people put up with Bruce. It looks like not many people got the memo that no D&D is better than bad D&D. Being Bruce's target is no fun, and it seems like it's just a pain in the butt. What do you all think about this Bruce tale?